How
Well,
would an
well, well,
employer? What are some easy ways an employer could optimize for experience
well,
over reward?
Ogilvy's done one very smart thing, which I thought was absolutely admirable. I might have suggested it to them, but they certainly did it. Which is that everybody now, alongside a kind of flexible work regime where you only have 2 core days in the office and then one flexi day. Nobody's core day is a Friday, by the way. Alongside that, there's also a staff benefit, which is a month a year, not necessarily contiguous, a month a year of working from anywhere. So if you want to go and see your mum, and stay with your mum, you can go and stay with your mum and do your work from your mum's house, assuming your mum has tolerable Wi-Fi. Okay. Um, and you can go and work from anywhere for 4 weeks of the year. Now, to some people that might mean Ibiza, to some people it might mean visiting friends. Okay, but that's kind of sensible because it was kind of unfair, and particularly if you look in the United States where people only had 2 weeks vacation. Okay, so if you were an expat in the US and you had to go home for a week to go and visit your parents and your friends, what that meant was with your 2 weeks vacation, you typically only had 1 week of every year where you could go and explore the US, which makes it pretty pointless going and living in the US, really, doesn't it? If you can't explore the place. And so that's a really good idea. Now, what used to be the case is the only negotiables in an employment contract were how much and how many hours. Where was non-negotiable, when was non-negotiable, okay? And now you have really essentially 4 variables. And if people are willing to accept slightly less money in exchange for slightly more autonomy, or they're not so bothered about free time, but they are quite bothered about free where or free when. And I coined these phrases free where and free when because free time is leisure. Okay. Economists basically see the model of employment as you exchange leisure for money. You sacrifice some of your leisure time, and in return, your employer gives you money. It's a ridiculously narrow and shallow definition of work, but let's just part that for now. Okay. And leisure is valuable, but then when you're at leisure also has a differential value. If you're a really keen golfer, the ability to play golf on Wednesday for a couple of hours and then work in the evening when it's dark, okay, is disproportionately valuable to you because you can't play golf in the dark. If you're a really enthusiastic dogger, I imagine it's the other way around, right? Okay. Now, the point I'm making is that that's kind of free when. It's not about leisure. It's not about a quantity of leisure. It's about when I particularly like going into, I live in Kent. I can go into my local town on a Wednesday when nothing's very crowded and have a bit of a mooch around for an hour in return for working when I mean, after 5 o'clock, it's dark and wet and horrible. I mean, there's nothing you can do that's meaningful as a leisure activity other than watch television in the British winter anyway. So the extent to which you spend your daylight hours in an office and then you go home to sit in the dark is absurd. So some degree of flexibility of when, and then there's flexibility of where, which might mean, for example, I can actually afford a family home if I only have to commute into London twice a week because I can just move out to pluck a place out of a hat, Rochester. Whereas I can't do that if I've got to commute in 5 days a week. And so those things are all of value. And it's a healthy state of affairs where the value exchange between employer and employee becomes just more intelligent and more nuanced. The more variables there are, there is more opportunity of actually gaining value from that exchange. Mutual value, I mean.
There is a very illogical phenomenon at my work. I work at KPMG as a consultant, and one of the most mentioned staff benefits externally, or how well marketed this is incredible, is we get a day off on our birthday every single year. And that just the framing of that is so much more beautiful in saying you get an extra day off because
Yeah.
everybody wants their birthday off. It's their special day. The psychological effect of having that one day off guaranteed is such an easy way to market having one extra day. And it's spoken about at every recruitment event, online, on forums. It's such a clever staff benefit, in my opinion.
No, no, no. And so this is another thing, which is I don't think I think the investigation of the employer value exchange has become ridiculously kind of formulaic and reductionist. And what is valuable, one thing it doesn't really understand the value of is just what you might call confidence in your continued employment. And employers have continually eroded that feeling that this is a mutual arrangement where we intend for you to be a long-term part of our team. And they used to do it with training courses, expensive things, a little bit of staff entertainment, company cars. You actually felt you and your employer were mutually invested in an enterprise. And the whole thing has become transactional because it's been modeled around this American kind of hire and fire at will thing. And any sense of kind of paternalism or indeed confidence in your continued employment, reduction in uncertainty, which has a value. Okay. No one's been really factoring that in because they've just been looking at this very narrow economic model of, why would I work? Oh, I'm sacrificing leisure as a one off transactional decision in exchange for some useful work. And as a consequence, I think staff motivation has fallen through the floor. I think we're getting more and more people who are effectively, what's the phrase where people basically just slack off? And there's a Chinese phrase which is called like lying low, where you just do the bare minimum and keep the wolf from the door and don't try all that hard. And, there's also a huge burst of early retirement, which is incredibly wasteful because a lot of people retire not because they want to stop work, they retire because they want to stop commuting. And the ability to keep people on for longer in a valued role where they have considerable experience, but maybe coming in twice a week and then doing the rest of the work remotely, that seems to be quite an important way of coping with what is, after all, a huge decline in the working population. I don't know if you're a Peter Zeihan fan or if you're a there's very good talk on it by the Hoover Institution. But we've kind of ignored demography, even though it's one thing you can confidently predict, okay? Because if you need more working adults now, you needed to start 31 years ago, okay? It's too late. If you look at China as a consequence of the one child policy, the population of China, by some predictions, in a certain length of time, will basically fall by more than half. They've even discovered they have far less people. They think they might have 200 less million fewer people than they thought they had in China. And this demographic collapse where you have very few working people supporting basically kids and retired people. All right. And the ratio of them, as you see in Japan, the ratio of retirees to actually working taxpayers then starts to become absolutely crippling for the system. The baby boomers had it good because they had remarkably few children to support and remarkably few and to educate and remarkably few old people to actually pay pensions for. The boom was a boom for precisely that reason. Very good book by David Willets, actually, who wrote about this called, I think, The Pinch, which is about this demographic problem. And if you have this, falling birth rate in the UK, not as bad as some places, but it's kind of below replacement levels, it becomes very, very problematic. And you can predict it with a high degree of accuracy because you can't suddenly produce 20-year-olds. Okay. And yet no one's talking about it. But actually, one way of actually solving the problem is for older people to continue working for longer in as far as they are able to under more agreeable conditions.